Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to this iteration of our Town Hall series here at Detroit Public Television, brought to you by the Black Church of Detroit series. We are here to have a conversation about gun violence. I'm so excited that you all have chosen to spend your evening with us. Well, just a little bit of your evening. I'm Orlando Bailey. I am a journalist with BridgeDetroit.com, and I'm also a regular contributor to American Black Journal here on Detroit Public Television. Come on in, share this live, share the link, share the YouTube, share the Facebook page. We want to get as many folks tuned into this conversation as possible. Once again, we thank you for joining us. We're going to have the opportunity to ask questions from today's esteemed panel of faith leaders here in the city of Detroit, and I cannot wait for us to get into what I hope to be a really, really palpable and meaty discussion. And so, without further ado, let's get right on to it. I'm so happy to introduce to you all our esteemed panel. First up, I want to introduce you to Bishop Charles H. Ellis III of Greater Grace Temple. He doesn't need any introduction further than that. Bishop Ellis, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for introducing me, Orlando, because more people don't know me than that do. So thank you for introducing me to those that don't.
That's really humble of you, sir. Thank you for being here. Can't wait to talk to you. Also joining us tonight is the pastor of 20 years. He just celebrated his 20th anniversary as pastor of Church of the Messiah. Y'all know this guy too. His name is Pastor Barry Randolph. Pastor Barry, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. So humbled to be here. It's an honor.
It's an honor to have you. Also joining us is the pastor of Oak Grove AME Church. She's no stranger to these Detroit streets. Reverend Cindy Rudolph, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
It is my pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you so much.
It's our pleasure to have you. And lastly, but certainly not least, please help me welcome the pastor of Third New Hope Baptist Church in Detroit, my friend, Reverend QuanTez Pressley. Reverend Pressley, thanks for being here.
I'm to be here with you tonight.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. And thank you for saying yes. Listen, I want to let everybody know that tonight's event was made possible through an ongoing initiative of Detroit Public Television called The Black Church in Detroit, which airs monthly on American Black Journal and is a partnership between Detroit Public Television, the Ecumenical Theological Seminary, and the Charles A. Wright Museum of African American History, and informed by a 40-member advisory committee of church and civic leaders representing the diversity of theology and thought in our city. This local initiative, known as the Black Church in Detroit, was inspired by the 4-hour PBS documentary series from Henry Louis Gates called The Black Church. This is our story. This is our song. This film series, which premiered on PBS stations nationwide in February 2021, explores the 400-year-old story of the Black Church in America, the evolution of worship spaces, and the men and women who shepherded congregations from the pulpit, the choir loft, and the church pews. Tonight, you can watch us and join the conversation live on the American Black Journal and Detroit Public Television Facebook pages, on Detroit Public TV's YouTube channel, and in our Facebook group, The Black Church in Detroit. We want to hear your voice tonight. Please make sure that you make yourself heard and share any questions you have for us. We will take your questions throughout the evening and look forward to your input in shaping this conversation. It would also be streaming live on the Wright Museum Facebook and Bridge Detroit's Facebook page, and also on the Ecumenical Theological Seminary's Facebook. With this event tonight, we celebrate our commitment to cover the influence of the Black church in our city. We welcome your questions and comments throughout tonight's event. Please share them in the Facebook and YouTube live chat and the comment sections. We will begin tonight by taking a look at highlights from our recent episode of the Black Church in Detroit series, which explored the issue of gun violence and how the church and the community can play a role in prevention efforts. And we will discuss some key issues that arise from it. So, this first video you'll see is a clip from the latest American Black Journal episode on the Black Church in Detroit, featuring our panelist, Reverend Cindy Rudolph.
Here we are, dressed in our orange, remembering those who have died senselessly, to gun violence. And instead of coming together to combat this culture of senseless bloodshed, we are more divided than we ever were, because there are those who could, in fact, make a change and make a difference, but instead they allow laws to remain in place that protect gun manufacturers from being sued and refuse to pass laws to protect our children from being shot in school. This is not who God created us to be. This is who we are not. All week long, some of us saw on television family members and survivors and even frontline workers who have testified before Congress about just how horrific it was when those babies and those teachers and defenseless victims were slaughtered in cold blood. And yet there are those who insist that their right to own a military-style assault rifle is more important than the right for innocent victims not to be murdered in cold blood. This is not who God created us to be. This is what we are not.
Certainly a relevant conversation that Pastor Rudolph was having with her congregation. And so I want to get right into it. Hey, you guys can continue to comment. We will acknowledge you. Bonnie Whitaker, thanks for joining us. Charlize Rogers, thank you for joining us. So, panelists, I recently heard a critique from someone who is both in the faith and law enforcement community that forums like these do not move the needle on the progress we are trying to make toward curbing gun violence. He said that nothing actually happens but talking. And so first, Reverend Rudolph, I want to start with you. How do you respond to that? And tell us what you are actually doing to combat gun violence.
Well, thank you so much, Orlando. I would disagree that forums don't move the needle. I think it's very good for us to have this kind of a discussion. And many of us in the faith community are doing a lot that people simply don't know about. So let me talk about Oak Grove and what we do and what we've done. One of the things that we've done in the past is we held a gun buyback in partnership with the Wayne County Sheriff's Office. And we had people lined up out the door, bringing guns in to redeem, cash for those guns. And it was very, very successful. And so we need to do our part in getting guns off the street. That's something I would certainly be open to doing again in the future. We're currently attempting to partner with Project Child Safe so that we can distribute locks on a mass scale to encourage responsible gun ownership. And we also have to address some of the issues that are associated with gun violence, such as poverty. And that's something that we do on a daily basis because we are very focused on outreach at Oak Grove, everything from feeding programs to clothing giveaways. We're approaching the Christmas season where we do our biggest outreach of the year, which is Come Home for Christmas, where we minister to hundreds of families, and we offer everything from toys to bikes to toiletries. We minister to not just young people, but seniors and the entire family as well. And this is our effort to fulfill the Jesus mandate to minister to the least of these. And so poverty is something that we address on a regular basis. We also have youth programming and outreach, such as our back to school rally, which is a fun day of activities where we offer free haircuts, free teeth cleaning. We give away backpacks, and we also offer classes because we find that it is very important to instill those godly values in children at a young age, because when you do that, they are less likely to go out and commit crime. Mm-hmm. And so those are some of the things that we are doing already. We're certainly open to doing more. If people have additional suggestions, we're open to that because we want to do our part to combat gun violence.
And that's how the work gets done, by first starting with the conversation. I love what you said, that conversations absolutely move the needle, but the work that you are doing addresses some of the root causes that I would want to talk about a little bit later. Bishop Ellis, I am really anxious to hear how you respond to that critique, and would love to hear what you are actually doing, right, to combat gun violence beyond just talking.
Thank you, Orlando. And I think that we have to be ministers of the gospel. We have to be ministers of change. And I would say that everything begins with a conversation. So if you're not willing to talk about situations or circumstances or things that are happening in our society or affecting us as a people and as a community, then you will never find solutions. I find that when we all get to a table and begin to talk, then guess what? Somebody has great ideas. When I saw many of the photos that Pastor Rudolph shared about back to school festivals and giveaways at Christmas and all of those kinds of things, I believe that all of us on here could share those kinds of photos, because we're all, for the most part, participating in some kind of way of uplifting the community. And again, guess what? We all came to those, we all arrived at those kinds of events by talking and by having conversations and communications. If somebody's found out, well, I did this, okay, hey, I'm gonna do one of those in my part of the community, and I'm gonna do that in my geographical location. So I believe that everything begins with a conversation. And if you're not willing to talk, if you're not willing to converse about situations, issues, and concerns, then you're never going to come up with antidotes or remedies. So I think that conversation is absolutely prudent. Now, faith without works is dead. After you get done praying, you have to get up and put wheels on your prayers and put legs on your prayers and begin to walk those things out. And likewise, conversations without some kind of resolute action at the end of those conversations could be a waste of time.
I love it. Thank you, Bishop Ellis. Reverend Pressley, you're coming at this, I know, from a couple of different angles. So how do you respond to that critique? And tell us what you're actually doing to combat gun violence, sir.
Well, again, thank you for the question. And, I think that the pastors can be sympathetic to the fact that I think every week we struggle to be sure that our conversations through proclamation is making a difference. Through our preaching and our teaching, we many times are praying, asking God that it is indeed changing the hearts and the minds of our people. And sometimes we can't be certain that that is occurring, but that's where the work of the Holy Spirit comes in and ensures that it meets its mark. And so I understand that, again, it can seem kind of cyclical, these kind of conversations that we're having, and it seems as if it's not moving anything forward. But what I would like to distinguish between is like solving something versus surviving it, because the issue of gun violence is so massive, and it is really a national issue. That it is true that some of the conversations that we're having locally doesn't seem to be putting much of a dent into the issue. And so we're unable to solve it. But although we're unable to solve it immediately, doesn't mean that we're not able to inform people on how they can survive it by providing them with information that, again, allows them to protect themselves, their families, and their communities. And so in that way, that's really a focus here at Third New Hope, is to just, again, educate our congregation and our community about what's going on in our neighborhood, and then to give them this sense of empowerment that they can make a meaningful difference, even if it's just a small change. That one change can save one life, and saving one life is one life enough. And so, again, I do understand the frustration when we're having these conversations and it seems as if change is slow, if not gradual. But I am, encouraged that by continuing in these conversations, we can indeed see things improving even incrementally.
Thank you for that, Reverend Pressley. Pastor Barry, how do you respond to this critique that these forums only just push conversation without action, and tell the folks what you are actually doing to combat gun violence?
Well, one thing I can say for sure is everybody's on this call is somebody who's doing something. That's why we've been invited. So I concur with everything that everybody has said so far. It's boots on the ground. But also, too, gun violence is a big issue, and you got to approach it from so many different avenues, because it's not one size fits all. So it's going to take everybody coming together to build this thing out. As a lot of you know, at Church of the Messiah, we do an annual Silence the Violence march and rally. And I know marches don't stop gun violence, but the march that we do is to honor the innocent victims of gun violence by bringing out their families to let them know, hey, this was a human being. And today we're going to honor them. They're not a number. They're not a case on somebody's desk. This is a human being, and we're going to honor them. The rally that takes place after the march brings together everybody who's working on issues pertaining to gun violence, whether that's mental illness, whether that's boots on the ground work. We brought together over 50 organizations that worked on so many different issues when it comes to gun violence. The church also, we do everything from housing and employment to entrepreneurship to providing the internet. So we have to make this whole thing tangible, but it's going to have to be taken from the approach of coming from a bunch of different avenues, because it's not one size fits all.
A holistic approach. And Pastor Barry, thank you so much for talking about the Stop the Violence rally. In fact, we have a clip that we want to show of you talking to the crowd that gathered around Church of the Messiah to celebrate those fallen victims.
Boots on the ground is where a lot of the money needs to go. Meet the people who are here, who are making this happen and doing this work every single day. All the different groups that you see out here, you have the ability to sign petitions. You have the opportunity to join those groups, see what they're all about, intermingle, and see what fits.
I want to eventually see gun violence eradicated. Bringing all of these people together are the people who are boots on the ground, are the people who are stakeholders. We can eradicate this if we continue to work together, share resources, let people know what's going on and what's happening, and make sure that funding goes to right places, but give people an option where they can come in and work towards eradicating gun violence. I believe we can do this.
So many partners converging on that Stop the Violence gun rally. I saw so many different people from the legislature to the sheriff's office to the Detroit Police Department and the faith and community development community. Hats off to you, Pastor Burry. I want to remind everybody that you have the opportunity to ask questions of this esteemed panel. So please do so in whatever chat that you are watching us on. I want to pivot to some statistics from the latest, just from last week, about where we are with violence, particularly gun violence here in the city of Detroit, and ask you all to respond to it. So as of October the 18th in Detroit, we've had 250 homicides compared to 242 at this same time last year. We have 790 non-fatal shootings compared to 911 this time last year. One of you, Pastor Pressley, is a police commissioner and a pastor. And so I'm wondering, Pastor Pressley, what you are seeing, number one, on the ground, and just how many funerals have you presided over? Because I want to contextualize these numbers by making sure that we understand that there are human beings behind these numbers, Reverend Pressley.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. You know, oftentimes when it comes to what the church is doing around gun violence, we're not thinking about the aftercare that often churches are providing to these families who are now navigating a season of grief, having lost their loved one prematurely and unnecessarily. And you're absolutely correct. You know, every Thursday at the Board of Police Commissioners meetings, we get this detailed report on all the incidences of violence that are happening in our community. And it's so heart-wrenching. And one of the reasons why it is so heart-wrenching is because the overwhelming majority of the perpetrators and victims are between the ages of 12 and 19 years old. And so we're talking about children before they're even truly beginning to live their lives, having their lives taken away from them, either by now having to engage with the criminal justice system, having been a perpetrator of violence, or having their life taken away from them being a victim of that violence. And so it weighs on my heart because particularly as the church has a obligation to, again, address this issue, we also have to be honest about the fact that we have a huge chasm that is growing between the church and this emerging generation. And if we're really going to be able to change this trajectory, we're going to have to bridge that gap between these faith communities and our younger populations so that we're ensuring that we are, again, one, informing them on the value and the sanctity of their lives, but then also providing them with conflict resolution skills and other resources and support that will help them to mitigate this rising violence that we're seeing in our community.
Reverend Presley, quick follow-up for you. Can you say more about this rising chasm that you sense between the church and the emerging generation? What do you see?
Yeah, no, honestly, I mean, Pew did a research not too long ago, and it's, stating that, our society is becoming even more secularized. And so as we're seeing millennials and Gen Zers become of age, they don't have as much of an association and attachment to faith life or church practice as some of the older generations do. And so a lot of the ministry that we're doing, whether it be social service programs, whether it be workshops where we're trying to engage this population, we're having a difficulty in really being able to engage them in ways that are making a meaningful difference. Because to be quite honest, many of them would say that the church lacks credibility, that they haven't seen them being visible. And in many ways, they see it as their grandparents' faith and not being as present in their current situations. And so that is really an area that we have to place some particular and intentional focus in if we're going to really make a difference in this issue.
Bishop Ellis, can you respond to these numbers that I just laid out? You have been known to open the doors of Greater Grace Temple when something violent occurs, and we know that there's going to be a huge outpouring of support for families. What are you saying? How do you respond to these numbers?
I think that I've been able to navigate and to walk in between the law enforcement community as well as the community. And I've been a person who will call it wherever it is. Most police officers' funerals that they die in the line of duty are held here at Greater Grace Temple. People call me the law enforcement pastor. At the same time, I'm marching with Black Lives Matters when, listen, if it's right, it's right. If it's wrong, it's wrong. And nobody needs to be absolved or have carte blanche in terms of their actions. Everybody needs to be accountable when they act out. And if it's not the way it should have been according to the law, then everybody needs to be addressed by the law equally, law enforcement as well as the community. And I make it very clear on where I am. When you're right, I'm with you. When you're wrong, I'm not with you. And it's as simple as that. I will say that even when we look and see the shooting in St. Louis, Missouri on today, I don't know how you're going to keep guns on the street and give individuals carte blanche, pretty much in terms of carrying guns, and not expect that you're going to have increased gun violence. Now, I want to make sure from the religious standpoint, from the church standpoint, we have to call things where they are. We have to speak truth to power. And when I hear politicians and some individuals really trying to set the blame at increased gun violence on mental illness, I'm not ready to receive that. Listen, sometimes, people kill folk not because they're mentally ill, but because they're evil. I said, we are people of color and we experienced slavery, our grandparents and our great grandparents. And listen, a slave master didn't hang you because he was mentally ill. They didn't shoot you at will because you didn't see things the way they saw it because they were mentally ill. They were just evil, pure and simple that. So we have to not assign all of the gun violence or the increased gun violence numbers and percentages and cases to the mentally ill. That's unfair. Everybody that has mental problems is not out killing somebody, period and point blank. But I think that we have to find a way to do something with the proliferation of all these guns out on our streets. When you have, as we just saw here in Oxford, Michigan, let me use Uvalde down in the San Antonio area. When you have approximately 100 officers that can be held at bay by one individual in a school that has a gun that they cannot overpower. They have the numbers, but they don't have the gunpowder to overpower this one gentleman. That's a problem when it's legal for that person to have that kind of gunpowder. And when you have an officer saying, well, if my son was in there, I would have rushed in there. That's a problem as well. Somebody would call that mentally ill. When you're taking a sworn oath and you say, well, if it's your kid, I'm not going in there with that kind of gunpowder in there. But if it was my son, I would have went in there. So I have a problem with us trying to assign these percentages and increase gun violence to the mentally ill.
I thank you for that delineation, and I definitely want to come back to that when we talk about root causes. But you bring up something about this proliferation of guns into community, and Reverend Rudolph, in the opening clip, you are critiquing some of the systems and policies that allow for that kind of proliferation of guns in the community in your pulpit. And so really, number one, appreciate the approach of recognizing that failed systems and failed policies allow for this. So number one, react to these numbers that I read, but how are you sort of flirting in between, being on the ground and addressing community, but also this policy lens that you bring out in that you brought out in the clip we opened with?
We have a gun problem, and it is not just a community problem. It is a national problem. It is an American problem. And if you compare it to what we see around the world, we are the only nation who has this kind of gun violence and these kind of statistics. In that same sermon, I referenced an article in the New York Times where they looked at several nations that had a culture of gun ownership. But after mass shootings, they tightened restrictions and saw those numbers plummet, if not disappear altogether. One nation that really stood out was Australia. They had a mass shooting back in 1996. And after they had a mandatory gun buyback where over 1 million guns were redeemed and melted into sledge, they saw that there were the numbers plummeted to the point where there was only one mass shooting in the last 26 years. Since 1996, they've only had one mass shooting as a result of them tightening those restrictions. And people say things like, well, guns don't kill people, people kill people. But the reality is people with access to guns are killing people. This is a unique problem to America, and the only way to resolve it is common sense gun laws. We need legislation. We need to have the age increased. You have to be 21 to buy a drink, but you can be 18 to buy a gun. We need an assault weapons ban because there's no reason in the world.
Rudolph, how is this conversation going with lawmakers? Are you having conversations with legislators and elected officials about what needs to happen to enact these kinds of changes? And how are those conversations going?
The challenge is they don't have the majority numbers. They don't have the numbers necessary, because when I talk to people about it, they feel the same way I do. But the numbers they just don't have in order to make the change. If you have people, who are coming together and blocking common sense gun laws, until we vote some of those folks out of office, we're not going to see the change. And that's why we're constantly, in the church, we can't tell people who to vote for because we certainly don't want to put our 501c3 status in jeopardy. However, we can tell people you need to vote in every election at every level, all up and down the ballot, because until we vote people who are in the way out of office, we're not going to see change, and we're not going to see the policy change and the legislation that we need to see in order to get these guns off the street. There's too much access to guns. If I have a mental health issue, if I am 18 and I'm angry and I, am not necessarily making the best decisions, and I go out and buy a gun, I shouldn't be able to walk into a store and buy an AR-15. And there ought to be some sort of more layers of prevention, as opposed to anyone who wants a gun can go into a store and get one. That's a problem.
Yeah, and you highlight that, to solve this legislatively, it's really a partisan and political issue that's been highly polarized in recent years. Pastor Barry, I want to come to you. Number one, I want you to react to these numbers as of October the 18th, but I also want to hear you react to the chasm that Reverend Pressley described earlier on in his comments. Pastor Barry, you always tout that you have a church that's full of young people. Number one, how are you doing that? And number two, how do you react to these numbers?
All right, great question. So the say is when it comes to these numbers, we have to remember, just like Reverend Rudolph had mentioned, this is a unique American problem. America has 333 million people in it, and yet we have 400 million guns. There are more guns than people, and this is truly a problem. And I know there was recently one major denomination that literally called it idolatry, the way that Americans love their guns and put guns before people, that it is literally idolatry to be able to do this. When you know that children are being murdered in the street, people are not storing their guns safely, and we have all of these issues and all these problems, and you have people who really will stand up for the right of gun ownership before the lives of children, and that is just truly a problem. At Church of the Messiah, 60% of our congregation is African American males under the age of 30. So a lot of times I tell everybody I have the Church of Ray Pookie, and I love Ray Pookie. But we in the community, really are the most vulnerable. They don't reject God. It's one thing I learned. They don't reject God, but sometimes they reject the package that the church put God in. So sometimes they want to see a different type of package. And just like Jesus, they want to see the church out in the highways and the byways in the street. They want to see the sermons actually being demonstrated in the community and neighborhoods. So just like everybody on this panel and many churches in Detroit that are doing great works, we do affordable housing. We do provide free internet services for those who can't afford it. We do have a doctor's office. We do have an attorney's office. We have a business incubation center inside of the church. We have an employment office. All of these is to help the folks have the skill sets to be able to take care of themselves. And they literally, because of the work that we do, that's what brings them through the door. A lot of them, they're not saying, "Oh, Pastor Barrett's this great preacher. I'm coming to church on Sunday." But when you come to church to pay your rent, come to church to get the internet, coming to church to get a job, come to church to start a business, come to church to get back in school, eventually they stop and say, "Let me see what church is like." So when the church is in the community and neighborhood, in the street, doing the work, people will be attracted to the church doing the work. And I think that's what, all of us on this panel, this is what it is that we do. And this is part of the success, by being able to demonstrate the sermon being the sermon in action. And just like Bishop Ellis said, faith without works is dead. We can say God is good, but if it is not evident in the world, then it's spiritual malpractice.
Pastor Barry, while I have you, I want to contextualize this conversation further in place. And when we're talking about the city of Detroit, we're talking about a city that is almost 80% Black, right? Almost 1 in 3 people in the city of Detroit are Black folks. And I think the city for a minute now has been carrying this tension of wanting to be and feel safe without a whole lot of surveillance. And so a new ShotSpotter contract was approved for about $7 million by council, but it was not without its controversy. Is this technology a good thing for Detroiters?
Wow, that's a loaded question. So with technology, I don't know much about ShotSpotter. I don't know much about it per se. But I can tell you that a lot of people in the community, because I am in the community and neighborhood, and I know that there's some people who are for it, who are saying things like anything to be able to cut down on gun violence in the community and neighborhood is necessary. And if that works, then let's go with it. We gotta turn over every stone to see what it is that we can do. And then we have others in the community and neighborhood and say, hey, $7 million can hire more police, or it can go to community groups that's doing the boots on the ground work to be able to help, people in the community and neighborhood. And there's so many organizations and groups that's out there that could benefit from being able to have this money. So it's kind of a catch-22. You want to be able to do whatever it is that you can to be able to eradicate this issue of gun violence. And so we got to look at it from many different angles.
Bishop Ellis, I want to allow you the opportunity to respond to that question as well.
Sure. I'm all for a shot spotter. When people talk about, sometimes they say, well, we could spend that $7 million on something else. Well, all of us can spend money on whatever we spend it on. At the end of the day, what is needed? Well, we need more housing. If you look around, housing is going up all over Detroit. So housing is not being sacrificed because of the $7 million for the expansion of the shot spotter. I think that we need everything we can to keep ourselves safe, to make sure that we can live in this community without being perpetrated upon. And I think that, we have to deal with correct information. I just get a big turnoff when people are arguing a point that's not valid and that is not accurate and that is not fact. I heard that ShotSpotter was taking pictures of you and it was videoing you. It does none of that. So let's stop that conversation, because it's hard to argue with foolishness or incorrect information when people are not willing to receive the correct information. I'm all for ShotSpotter. Listen, we are in danger here. You're looking around, you're talking about, well, people are watching me. Yeah, I'm watching everybody. Listen, I'm not walking down the street. I would love to walk down the street and not worry about anything. But I'm looking at everybody walking past me, coming my direction. If I hear somebody walking up on me, I'm looking. When somebody comes in a place, I let them know I see you. Because again, most people trying to slip in, get something or do something and slip out. And we are all surveilling everything around us. ShotSpotter, from everything that I've learned accurately, is not a surveillance piece of equipment. It is not taking pictures of you. It is not listening to your conversation. It's listening for a sound. So again, if we're going to argue a point, let's argue facts. It's like the vaccination. You know what I'm saying? Well, Reverend, I heard it's the mark of the beast. That's when we're all gone and raptured up out of here. Well, Reverend, I heard that they've got some tracking devices in that vaccination, and they don't know where I'm at. I told the guy at the liquor store, I said, we know where you are. You're at the liquor store every day, trying to get a dime or trying to get a dollar. You're not important enough. I'm not important enough for the government to know where I am 24 hours a day. So we have to keep talking truth to power and not allow people to go out there talking about things that are not factual, making an argument.
All right. I want to play a couple of clips. Number one, we want to hear from Teferi Brent at the Stop the Violence rally. But then we want to hear from Reverend Pressley on the latest episode of American Black Journal, Black Church in Detroit series. And then I got a question to follow up these clips.
We know that there are four things directly impacting criminogenic behavior, which means the criminal mindset and behaviors are born out of four things. One, fatherlessness, right? Two, substance abuse. Three, functional illiteracy. And four, of course, mental health, unresolved trauma, undetermined trauma, right? So until we are willing to address those things institutionally and systemically, right, and legislatively, we will continue to have an issue with crime.
And Reverend Pressley, talk about the church and, again, its opportunity to interrupt this cycle of violence. I mean, we live in a city where there has been too much violence for years and years. And of course, the last few years, I think, have gotten much more intense in terms of the number of incidents, the kinds of incidents that we're seeing. The church plays such an important role in people's lives in Detroit. Where does it fit in this particular issue, and where is that chance to interrupt it?
Yeah, great question. I think that first and foremost, Chief White at the funeral services for fallen officer Lauren Courts mentioned that he needs everybody to do their part, that everyone in the community has a part to play. And I believe that the church has an essential part in that fight and combating against the violence that we see in our communities. And I think first starts with the moral message that God stands on the side of life. All that we know about the scriptures is an affirmation of life. And so we as the church should do everything that we can to secure and to protect a full and flourishing life. But I think there's two areas in which we can have more specific input. You know that a lot of violent crimes occur as a result of poverty. And so a number of our programs are aimed at helping people to alleviate the poverty that they experience so that they don't have to engage in crimes that often leads to violence. And then we also have been hearing the conversation about how important mental health is, again, in being able to mitigate violent responses in our community. And likewise, I think the church can play a very important role. Here at Third New Hope, we have a Seasons of Grace ministry that provides mental health services to those who are in need. And so I think that if we address poverty and mental health, particularly from a spiritual and moral point of view, that we can begin to disrupt the kind of violence that we're seeing in our community.
In all of your answers to the questions tonight, you all have referenced, solving for some of the root causes that can lead to these really violent outcomes here on the streets of the city of Detroit. Reverend Rudolph, I want to start with you by asking this question. What is the spiritual imperative for change versus the physical? We know that gun violence has a very physical manifestation, right? A person is no longer here. But is there a spiritual call to action that will help change that manifestation?
That's a deep question. I would say, number one, I think the most obvious thing that we are mandated to do would be prayer from a spiritual perspective. I think also teaching love for our fellow human being. God is love. God not only teaches love, but God is love. And so I think when we begin to teach people to appreciate the value of human life and the fact that we don't give life to the people whose life we're ending, we certainly don't have the right to end life. God is the giver of life. And so we as people need to emphasize love and love for our neighbor, loving our neighbor as ourselves. So from a spiritual perspective, that's what we would need to do, is to teach and also, of course, to pray that the Prince of Peace would be sovereign in our communities. But then also, as they have said many times, and as it says in the book of James, faith without works is dead. And so we need to not only pray, we need to not only teach people to value the lives of one another, but we also need to put boots on the ground. We also need to make sure that we're pushing for legislation. We also need to make sure that we're offering programming and outreach to avoid some of those mitigating factors such as poverty. We also need to advocate for more funding for mental health. And so there are a lot of things that we need to do from both a spiritual and a practical perspective.
Reverend Pressley, I want to come to you with the same question. Spiritual imperative to change some of these violent physical outcomes. How do you see it?
Yeah, no, I think that it's our primary focus because, again, as being ambassadors for God, we recognize that our responsibility is to advocate for the perseverance, the promotion, and the protection of life. The Bible tells us that the enemy comes but to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come that you might have life and life more abundantly. And in doing so, it requires that we recognize the sanctity of the imago Dei that each individual carries, that each person is created in the image of God, and that image gives them the worth and the value that we should be preserving and protecting. And so, again, I think that one of the things that is challenging us in this conversation is that there has been a devaluing and diminishing of the value of life, particularly for Black and brown bodies, which makes this kind of violence kind of become passé and oftentimes overlooked because there's not much worth attached to the lives of those who are of Black and brown communities. But I think it is important that we as faith communities, particularly as the Black church, that we begin to confront and combat that narrative so that, again, we see ourselves as children of God, as sons and daughters of God, as being made in the image of God, and therefore giving us the motivation and the fuel to, again, to promote, to preserve, and to protect that life.
The changing of narrative. Bishop Ellis and Pastor Berry, we got 1 minute before we get to the audience questions. Anybody want to jump on that last question?
Well, I think as it relates to mental health, Jesus meets a man in the cemetery. He is tormented by demons, and Jesus, he speaks to those demons to come out of him. The man is now in a place of being cleansed of those demons that were tormenting him. After that, the man puts on clothes and he gets his right-mindedness back. I think for those people that are suffering from mental conditions, we as the Church of God have to pray for them and invoke the presence of God upon their lives, and then seek the clinical help that they can get back to their right-mindedness. And once they get back to their right-mindedness, then they will be clothed, and clothed means they're back into a place of normalcy. In other words, they can fit in their communities, because the community is now where you can have that appreciation for yourself and that community help and all of those wraparound services that can help you get back to where you need to be, up and on your feet.
Thank you, Bishop. Pastor Barry, you got 30 seconds.
I just want to say we fight against wickedness in high places. And we are the people of God, and we got to stand up, keep doing the right thing. And remember that the kingdom of heaven is not mere words, it's a demonstration of power. And we, the church, we got to show the power of God is above all this wickedness.
Can
I want to thank
you in 10 seconds?
Go for it.
We also offer a grief share ministry at Oak Grove. There are many families who are bereaved because of gun violence. And so that's one of the ways that we address this as well, is by ministering to the mental health of those who are grieved because of gun violence.
I love that. We want to thank our streaming audience. Well over 100 of you have joined us tonight, and you all have not been shy about putting your comments and questions in the chat. And I'm going to get to some of them. We want to thank Bonnie Whitaker, who's a survivor, right? She says, I believe that the solution lies within the entire community, and her contribution is to tell my survivor story and to share with others. I love that, Bonnie Whitaker. The word says that they overcame the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. So you keep on testifying. We have a comment from a viewer who says, please let us address the role of music in the current fratricidal epidemic occurring throughout containment areas where we are struggling to survive, right? Hot 107.5 and the poison they play, which encourages us to shoot and kill each other. We were just having this conversation with a loved one a couple of weeks ago about the role of music. Anybody want to respond to that?
I would like to say that I think we have to own our part in this pandemic of violence in our communities. You know, I'm so confused because I see in one social media place that this one entertainer was being chastised by another entertainer because he was referring to another entertainer, female, as the B word, and her mom got upset, and then this other person said, well, let me talk to him because he can't do that. And then when I saw that same female entertainer being interviewed, she was saying that another high-powered entertainer, female, told her, be the B that you know you are. And I said, okay, I'm totally confused. Now her mom is upset because this other rapper entertainer is referring to her as a B, but now she refers to herself as a B from another higher powered entertainer. And I said, I'm totally confused. Now, if you want to respect yourself, then how's anybody going to call somebody else out for calling you what you're referring to yourself as? So we have to make up our mind. Either we just want to make money with all this stuff, but I'm just saying that to make money, but don't call me that for real. You can't have it both ways. Either we use the N-word within our community. Oh no, but I'm saying it in a good way. But the Caucasian guy, he can't say it because he's saying it in a derogatory way. Either we're going to use it or we're not going to use it. And if we're going to use it, you can't have a problem with anybody else that is using it. So again, I think we have to own that. And we have to decide, listen, it's time out for trying to correct others when we're part of the problem ourselves.
Wow.
I think it's a difficult question to answer, because obviously, all things kind of play a role or have some impact in the violence that we see in our community. But I think it becomes a matter of prioritizing what makes the greatest difference. And, when you get into that conversation, it becomes greatly difficult, because before we get to music, it's hard for me. I know that my grandparents grew up watching Western films where it was the shoot 'em up cowboy movies. And I don't know if gun violence mimicked the entertainment that they saw during that time frame. And then we know that it's not only a Black thing, violence is equal opportunity across ethnic groups and race groups of racial demographics. And so again, to kind of tailor it down to music may be a bit distracting, but we can focus on what we do know that is a commonality, which is poverty. You know, having a lack of opportunity and resources will likely drive somebody into violence. The broken family structure, I think that becomes more of a priority before the music does. The fact that there's not really a safety net or a sense of village or community to really surround and protect the young people who are growing up. We can talk about the failure of our education system that is really preparing kids to go to prison as opposed to providing them the resources that they need in order to live healthy and flourishing lives. And so again, as we begin to point at the things that are issues, I don't want to completely dismiss the fact that music and video games and movies and the like has desensitized us to violence, promotes violence. But again, as a matter of priority, I think that, you know, it kind of falls down on the list when we think about other things that really are the drivers of the violence that we're seeing in our community.
Let's park here for a second on some of the drivers that you named. And you know, one of the drivers you named is, you know, the broken family structure, the broken village. Pastor Barry, how did we get here?
Yeah, this has been long standing. It's one of the things. I remember having a conversation with a reporter when we were just talking about the city of Detroit when it comes down to crime and violence, and I remember saying, you know, this was, you know, over 60 years in the making. It was not just one particular thing that you can say actually made this whole thing happen. There's a lot of things that's making it happen. So one of the things that I know that we have to do is we have to be able to find the different ways to be able to work together. Now, one example I always use to tell people that when we put our mind to being able to get things done, we can. And that was, you know, when I was specifically telling a group of people about Devil's Night. And how for a long time, for those of us who are old enough, know that those were the 3 days when the city of Detroit burned. And then those 3 days all around this country and around the world, people watched this Detroit burned. And then you got law enforcement, got with clergy, got with business owners, got with Black clubs, got with activists. And everybody said, okay, y'all, enough is enough. We got to do something about this. And that turned out to be one of the largest gatherings of volunteers in this country that looked out for this city for those 3 days. And it went from Devil's Night to Angel's Night. Now, it took years. For years, people were out there working, doing this thing. And then eventually, now we no longer even have Angel's Night. So that example shows that when people get together and say, you know what, enough is enough. And we are just so tired of this. It's going to take all of us to be able to do this. We really can once we kind of put our mind to doing this. When it comes to the issue of gun violence, there's so many different avenues. Just like Reverend Pressley said, there's so many avenues. Absenteeism of fathers, drugs in the community and neighborhood. Detroit has a long-standing problem with racism, subpar schools. There's so many different things that got us here. We're not going to get out of this overnight. And there's not going to be one particular thing that's going to do it by itself. It's going to take all of us to be able to do it. So the biggest thing that I can say, y'all, we got to come together. And one thing that I pay attention to as a Christian minister, when Jesus Christ, the Son of God, started his ministry to go out and bring about the salvation of the world, he went and got a team. And if he can go out and get a team, then we can't do this by ourselves. It's so, the issue is so big that it's going to take all of us to be able to do it. And we're going to have to respect everybody where they are and the avenue that they choose to work in. You know, criticism is real easy to be able to say, well, I don't think that works. I don't think that you should be working over here. I don't think you should be working over there. We got to do it from legislation to boots on the ground, working with the young people, working with the parents, working in the schools, working in the neighborhoods. It's so many things.
No, but that's facts, Pastor Barry. I think that especially in movement work, we have to recognize that everybody has a role. And because somebody's role is different from yours, it doesn't necessarily require critique. It requires respect for that person or that movement carrying out that role. I'm getting a mirage of comments. Somebody said, listen, y'all, somebody said, I'm tired of folks saying we got to pray, pray, pray. I'm like, you do realize you hopped on a town hall with faith leaders here in the city of Detroit. They gonna pray and they gonna get into action mode as well. But one of the critiques that came in is about this unity question, Pastor Barry, and I would love for any of you who feel the need to jump in on this. Is there unity among pastors? You know, the comment was talking about sometimes it feels like, you know, the work of these various churches is very, very siloed. Are y'all talking to each other? Are y'all working together? Are y'all trying to bring about this unity that Pastor Barry is talking about?
So let me say real quick. So I know that PBS, our local PBS station, has been documenting our State of the Hood addresses that we've been doing at Church of the Messiah. Shout out to Pastor Ovella Davis for coining that term and getting this started. And in those State of the Hood addresses, we currently work with 114 religious organizations. I can't just say churches, because it also includes the Nation of Islam, it includes the Moors, it includes the Hebrewites, it includes a lot of other denominations that ordinarily wouldn't necessarily get together. But because all of the work that we're doing is in the neighborhood, we're literally talking about the state of the hood, and it is boots on the ground. And the scripture that we use for that is 1 Corinthians 4:20, because we don't talk about denomination at all. It is the kingdom of heaven is not mere words. It's a demonstration of power. And we have to come together as believers and as the people of God to demonstrate the power of building the kingdom. And we have to do that collectively. So yeah, we do meet once a month about how we're working to use resources collectively together. That's to build houses, create jobs, start businesses, all of that. That's what those meetings are.
All right. We got another question from Latrice Herring. How do you plan to reach people that don't yet have a relationship with God? Pastor Rudolph, I'm going to come to you with that one.
I think that you can reach them from a very practical standpoint and talk to them about something as basic as love, and introducing love, introducing the value of life, introducing how you value them as an individual and as a person. I think you can reach them just that way. And eventually, yes, I would want to bring God into the conversation, but that does not have to be the first conversation. I want them to know that I see them and I value them as an individual. And as I value them, they then can receive what I'm saying when we enter into that conversation about God, which would come later.
All right, we got just a couple of minutes left. I do want to play this last clip from the Stop the Violence march, and then I'm going to ask you guys about next steps and call to action. But first, let's watch this clip.
This type of event has a huge impact on our community. We need more events like this to happen more often so we can stop the violence, not just the gun violence, but all violence.
This is my second time out. My first time coming, I had just got released from a 15-year sentence in prison. You get to network and you get to build and be more impactful first and foremost. But it also sends a message to community that it's not just law enforcement that care or community that care. Everybody care because everybody is community. It's a human thing. So it gives a good message to the people, but it also encourages people to participate in this type of behavior, in these type of solution-oriented things that we're doing out here.
The solution is you. The solution are those brothers and sisters who are on the front line every day doing intervention work in our community that you don't know about. Remember, we out here to make noise for folks who no longer have a voice. We're talking about all of those folks who have died because of gun violence, and we want to lift them up. And we want everybody to know that they were a human being and that we love them. That's why we carry the signs. That's why we wear the shirts. We want everybody to know that we getting ready to take it to the streets and that we miss them, but we honor them today.
as the people, we should be the ones who are keeping our women safe, our children safe, our elders safe, our little girls and boys safe. It's our responsibility.
All right, y'all. So we talked a lot about action tonight, and certainly all of you are not only putting your faith to work, but putting action behind that faith. But I don't want people, the over 100 people who are watching this, to leave without a call to action. What do you want our viewers to do after the conversation, right? For those folks who are ready to roll up their sleeves and get to work, what's the call to action? Bishop Ellis, we'll start with you.
Well, we're working with a network of churches in terms of our physical and mental health. And we all know that at the end of the day, we want to see as many people as can to get in a good place mentally. And I'm not saying that you have mental illness or anything like that, but some do. But I'm just saying to get in a good mental place, the Bible talks about whatsoever things are lovely, honest, just, pure, of good report. Think on these things, because our thoughts direct our path. And if we can get people in a good place mentally and physically, then you'll begin to feel good about yourself, and you'll be able to make good decisions and right thinking decisions. So we certainly welcome everyone that wants to get involved in health challenges, in the mental health and the physical health. You can call us here at Greater Grace Temple, and we will certainly have a road to put you on and a place for you.
Call Greater Grace Temple, y'all. Reverend Pressley, your call to action.
My call to action, I'll say it in three parts. The first one is that we all be mindful of our own mental and emotional well-being. We like to use the phrase, but by the grace of God, there goes I. And I think we all need to take that to heart, that often the either victimization or the perpetration of violence is only by the grace of God. And so we must always be mindful of our mental, spiritual, and emotional well-being. Secondly, if you own a gun, make sure that it is secured and placed away from anyone who might use it as a child. I can't tell you how many Board of Police Commissioners meetings that I've had to sit there and hear of a child who died because they were able to get their hands on a gun and was able to and did something fatal to themselves. And so I'm encouraging you, if you own a gun, make sure that it is properly secured. You can go to your local precinct and get gun locks so that you can ensure that your firearm is indeed secure. And then the last thing is to vote. We're in the middle of an election cycle. And I know while this conversation has been about what churches can do, we really need all hands on deck. And so we need to ensure that we're electing public servants who indeed are in lockstep with our desires and our goals in our community, so we can indeed see this issue change. So check on your own mental health, make sure your guns are secure, and go and vote.
All right, Pastor Barry.
I definitely agree with that. Make sure you vote. This is a power that all of us have, and we want to be able to use this power. You want to be able to make sure that you are educated on what it is you're voting for, know the candidates that's going to stand up and have the same beliefs as you, the same beliefs and principles. Make sure that you take the time out to be to vote. Also, too, be responsible for you. What happens with you and what goes on in your family. Please be that model of a person that you want to be able to see. Work on being that person to the best of your ability, and make sure that you're around people who actually lift you up and bring the best out of you, and understand that all things really are possible with those who believe.
How can folks plug into the work at Church of Messiah, Pastor Barry?
You can plug into the work at Church of Messiah. You can come on Sunday. Our church service is at 12 o'clock. You can give us a call, learn about the programs that's here, 313-567-1158.
Reverend Rudolph, we started with you and we are ending with you. Your call to action.
All right. My call to action is also in multiple parts. I would say, number one, write your legislators, because we do need common sense gun laws, and perhaps we might even have to eliminate the filibuster in order to get that done. So call and write your legislators, and then also get actively involved in block clubs or other organizations that monitor what's happening in your community. And finally, I would say speak up. Because we have a culture that speaks about snitching, etc. But we need to speak up, because if you know something, you ought to say something, because the more shooters we get off the streets, the less likely we are to have repeat offenders. And so we all need to do our part in combating this culture of gun violence.
All right. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And thanks to all of you who are watching and who send us those great questions and comments. Tell your friends about our Facebook group, The Black Church in Detroit, and invite them to join so we can continue these great conversations there. We also invite church groups to continue these conversations within your congregation. The Black Church in Detroit initiative was made possible by support from the Washington Educational Television Association in Washington, D.C., and AAA. And we also want to thank all of the ongoing supporters of American Black Journal. Thanks to our producers of this watch party event, Colleen O'Donnell, Tammy Winsell, and our advisory council, and our panel liaison, Marty Bischoff from Detroit Public Television, and to our esteemed panelists who participated tonight, Bishop Charles Ellis III of Greater Grace Temple, Pastor Ben Randolph of Church of the Messiah, Reverend Cindy Rudolph of Oak Grove AME Church, and Reverend QuanTez Pressley of Third New Hope Baptist Church. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thanks again to our great partners who helped to make this evening possible, including the Wright Museum and the Ecumenical Theological Seminary and our advisory panel and BridgeDetroit.com. You can watch new episodes of The Black Church in Detroit on American Black Journal the last Tuesday of every month at 7:30 p.m. with an encore broadcast the following Sunday at 9:30 a.m. You can get more details about the Black Church in Detroit initiative at onedetroitpbs.org/ABJ-church. Thank you, everyone. Have a